Patricia Smith Griffin. Wow. I'll start off by saying, wow. What she has done, she's gone back and found her family history back to the early 1800s. Patricia is an African American woman from the Miami, Ohio area, and she traces so many generations back, and her family have got all these archives together, combined it all with 23andMe and other ancestries.com and death certificates and archives, and have created a once in a lifetime podcast about her family, the legacy of Charity's children. You must listen to this. As of the recording of this, there's 5 episodes. First season, Wildest Dream, Inspiration, Fire Watchers, Africa Town, Out of Smoke and Ashes. What happens in this town where African Americans built, called Africa Town, and what happens afterwards. It's absolutely wonderful. And the podcast is the highest quality and produced. Her son does the music, but it's not just music. There's vocals, but it's all underlaid so well. Patricia does the narration. She has a background in journalism, and it's just a wonderful. I listened to it many times. You just need to, because there's just layers upon layers, and the way they've pieced it all together, and the weight of her generations of family are on her shoulders, and she's telling us all about it. It's absolutely wonderful. Please, you'll really enjoy this conversation. She's a wonderful orator, a wonderful woman, and her view on discipline is very interesting as well. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, in their passion, in their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. To talk to you, Patricia Smith Griffin. Thank you so much for your time. An absolute honor today. I know you are busy. Tell me, how important is it for us to trace and know and understand our family lineage?
It sounds so completely cliche, but it is absolutely so true. It gives us glimpses into the why of the who we are. Um, Knowing a little bit about your past, about the folks who were here before you, the folks upon whose shoulders you stand, it kind of, in ways knowing and unknowing, guides and directs and can give you an insight into the person that you are.
Absolutely wonderful. And what you've done with this podcast, the legacy of, Charity's children, and there's, as we speak, there's 5 episodes. And um, did you do this in lieu of writing a book, or you're going to have a book as well? Because you call it theater of the mind, and I think that's really downplaying it. I mean, the imagery, it's absolutely wonderful. The highest production level. It's just, and you are so wonderful narrating and producing it. Let's start right there. What a wonderful podcast.
I am, well, you make me blush. It is a labor of love on so many
Mm.
levels. Our
Mm.
family story is one that whether we've told for generations. Of course, this is why we, have the stories that we do. This is why we have the archives that we have. What I've done in my generation is to and I don't know if any generation before that could have done this because it
Mm.
would have been meaning that you had to physically go to these courthouses and into dusty basements and microfiche and look through things that are now available to us on the World Wide Web. So, having family oral histories, having family written histories, being able to research and correlate that with American histories, document that and confirm it through census data, city directories, archives that are available in county courthouses around the country. We weaved all of that together in order to tell our family story. And for me, on a personal level, I do get excited sometimes about that because these been stories that I have heard all my life, and to be able to see the historical documents that confirm
Mm.
these things, it's been quite a thrill, quite a journey. When I began writing it, I was not sure how I would present it.
Mm.
So to date, I do have several versions of it. So yes, as you said, I began thinking that this would be a historical book. And so the very first drafts are what I call my lecture format. I went from the lecture format to what I thought would be the book format.
Mm.
My work history is in broadcasting and talent work. So in reading one of the stories, I think it was the mission statement. I was reading it to an old friend. She was having a problem with her eyes, and so she couldn't read it. And
Mm.
so she asked me to read it to her. And when I read it to her, she said, "That's how you have to present this. You have to read these stories." And it just the light bulb went off, and I was like, why am I trying to reinvent the wheel? Why don't I just do what I do? um, and I've also worked as a journalist in radio news, which was absolutely a ball. And I think that what I've been able to do is to bring that journalistic perspective to it as well. So I'm going to tell you the who, what, when, where, why, and
Mm.
how of it. And so I think that's and I'm just fascinated by the fact and flattered that excuse me, that you are enjoying it.
Oh my goodness. Over and over I listen to it and I get little nuggets each time I hear it, and the music. I know I believe your son does it,
Yes,
and it absolutely so perfectly spot on. I mean, I these visions come in. One of the big helping points was that a lot of the women kept their maiden names in the family.
yeah. All of them did. It is how we have been able to tell this story. Historically, genealogy research is done and traced through the men in the family, but our lineage goes back to Dayton, Ohio, the Miami Valley, 220 years. And
Wow.
that is all traced through women who use their maiden name. I'm sometimes asked if I hyphenate, and no, my name is Smith, and so I don't need a hyphen for that.
Mm.
This is Smith Griffin, as my mother was Emma Johnson Smith, as her mother was Charlotte Higgins Johnson, as her mother was. I can go on, but I won't bury
Wow.
bore you.
Wow.
But Julia Galloway Higgins was her mother, and her mother, which was the challenge, was that she had one of those double names, Mary Louisa. So Mary Louisa Chittenden Galloway, and then Julia's father passed when she was just 4 months old. And so Mary Louisa later married Taylor. So sometimes she was Mary Taylor. And sometimes
Hmm.
she was Louisa Galloway. And so sometimes she was Mary Galloway. And so it was that was probably our only challenge. But of course, the nuggets along the way were the fact that she always used that Chittenden maiden name. And then of her mother, Julia Broddy Chittenden. And then Julia Broddy Chittenden's mother is Charity Davis Caesar Broddy. And we use all of those names: Davis, Charity Davis, Caesar. Charity was a child bride, Broddy. She had children in all of those names. She was the mother of 13 children, and she had children in all of those names. So as we do our work and our research, we are finding Charity's children along the way.
Is it a stereotype? Perhaps it's my experience, perhaps it's not yours. It seems to me that the women really keep the secrets and the foundations of the family together. I've seen since, occasions where, you know, grandmother would say something and the grandfather would be completely shocked. "I did not know that." And just the women just do you find that to be the case?
I absolutely do find that to be the case,
Mm,
especially in within our archive. The letters and journals are the ones that are extensive and detailed. Those things
okay.
are kept by the women. Reverend Charles Higgins, my great grandfather, he was the executive of Paul Lawrence Dunbar's estate, and so I think he is the exception to the rule. His writings are very detailed. Um, among our family archives, as the executor, he was very close with Paul's mother, Mother Dunbar, and she dictated some of her slave stories to him, and they are among our family archives. So his work was just a little different because of who he was and what he was doing, and understanding in the moment the importance of it. That's something I like to stress all the time too, because we exist in our worlds and we go quickly from one season to the next, and we forget how important our contributions have been along the way.
Mm,
Um, they will inspire those around you, and they will inspire your future generations. So take a minute or two to write it down. I think when we talk about journaling, people think that it has to be something long or lengthy, but I recently found a card that my great uncle had sent to my great aunt, Uncle
mm.
Charlie. Charles Higgins was a professor of music at Westminster Choir School in Princeton, New Jersey. And his sister, his younger sister, was back in Dayton at that time. And I had not known this, but apparently Aunt Isabel had a child that passed away.
Mhm.
And so it had must have been, according to this card that Uncle Charlie had sent to her, it must have been a period of time that had passed before he had reached out to her. And he apologized for the length of time that that it had been, and he simply said, "I just had no words." Um, as a historian and genealogist, what I am able to glean from just that very simple card with those very few words is enormous. It
Mm.
tells me a great deal about their relationship and about relationships in general. There are times when we don't know what to say, and
Mm.
we do let too much time pass. And we feel like when that time passes that we can't go back and make up for what we didn't do or what we did. But that card says that yes, you can. That
Wow.
sometimes you can just say, you know, what it is. I didn't know what to say. And then you just pick up and be the family that you're supposed to be. Because
Now
when
you
I
were
came along, my great aunt Isabel and my great uncle Charlie were thick as thieves. They
really?
had a beautiful relationship. So, yeah, let's move on.
Wow. Now you were going to actually start this months and months ago, but you revealed new information that set you back 6 months, correct? Or something like that?
Yeah, there is the story of Dayton's first Black community. It was called Africa or Africa Town.
Yeah.
It was located in the southeastern part of Dayton, Ohio, during the 1830s. This is something that I think Dayton, Ohio, that America should be proud of, that within the antebellum period, there was a free Black community that
Wow.
thrived. During the 1830s, the canals were built, the from Mad River on up through the Great Miami River, that connected Dayton to the north and the south, and the city began to grow and prosper. The people who built those canals were emancipated and the escaped enslaved. So the community that they built, that was located in a part of Dayton, Ohio, it was called Seeley's Ditch. So it was the runoff. It was where the factory runoff and all the yucky part of the city muck was. But these same engineers that built the canals rehabilitated that area. And so what was a ditch became a thriving community that had a tavern, bathhouse, homes, businesses that catered not just to Dayton's Black residents, but that was the Free Northwest Territory. So
Mm.
all travelers through the Free Northwest Territory would often stop at the Paul Pry, which was the tavern in that area. There, because the land became coveted, speculators began to attack the community. It began
Mm.
probably around the mid 1830s, about 1838, 1837 are some very well documented attacks on Africa Town. But by 1841, there were two major attacks in the latter part of January and then on February 3rd. February 3rd, the community was looted and burned to the ground. So quite a profound story. It is a story that I encourage your listeners to go to that podcast, take a listen to. And it also became a very integral part of our family history, because there were a group of people who stayed in Dayton, Ohio after that attack on Africa Town. And then there were also a group of people who left. Some left as soon as they could. Some other people had been just decimated, and it took time for them to gather resources, but they left later. The story became very integral in our family because it affected a marriage. This decision of whether to go or whether to stay. So we present this information, this research that we have on Africa Town. It was one of the very first podcasts that we had completed. And our historian, Sherry Gowdy, she is a historian and archivist, a community archivist as well. She unearthed some information. We had been researching and looking in and around Ohio, only to find that this attack on Africa Town was big news. And it was published in newspapers around the country. We uncovered some additional research, and because the story was too important to tell halfway, we wanted to get it right. So we stopped production and we held up the podcast. The podcast was released in December, probably not where we would have wanted it to be,
Mm.
but we thought that it was important to present the information in its entirety. We were able to, and what we did was we began researching the footnotes within the research, because I didn't want it to be a secondary source.
Mm.
I wanted what we reported. I wanted what we did to be primary sourcing. So we would research the footnotes, the within the footnotes, and that was how we were able to uncover over 35 specific incidents of attacks, up to including the fact that they went to the door of the constable that night and he turned them away and went back to bed. So too important a story, because regardless of how long it existed or what were the circumstances of its eventual demise, the fact that it did exist within the antebellum period, free Black people built a community that thrived, a community that was envied. That's something to be proud of. And we had to
Yes,
get it
sir.
right.
Yeah, and the way that's the episode 4, I believe, and, yeah, the way it's described, where, there's they meet a woman of ill repute, and,
Oh,
there's a
yes.
mob attack.
Mhm,
Eh,
mhm.
incredible.
Yes, it was. And then we have a episode that's on our website, charityschildren.org, The Cauldron, and it has some more of that background information. It was not an easy place to be Black in,
Right.
at a time in America where it wasn't easy to be Black either.
Mm,
And I think that there is the misconception that the North was a promised land, that it was a place where Blacks could be, and let's not get this wrong. Of course it was. Yes, in comparison, yes, it was. But as in our episode Freedom, Fire Watchers, as in our Fire Watchers episode, you hear of whites who brought the enslaved with them to the
yeah.
free Northwest Territory, and then defied Ohio's Constitution to try to keep them. So, yes, it was some better, but there were some real challenges to being Black in America then as in now.
Yeah, and that 3rd episode, Fire Watchers, where it's, is it 12 cents? Is it,
12 cents.
absolute
Had to register. The
yeah,
Ohio Black Codes, Ohio Black laws required that any free Black be registered within, I think you had 30 days to register within the time you came into the county, had to
right,
register with the county clerk, show them your certificates of emancipation, and each person in your household was charged 12 and a half cents. Now, that was the law in 1804. In 1807, they reinforced those Black codes. They reinforced those Black laws to include the bond being $500 per person. Now,
goodness,
there are not many of us who could post that today
right.
as a family unit, 500 per person. This was selectively enforced. And right before some of those attacks on Africatown in Cincinnati, Cincinnati leaders were noticing that their Black population was expanding. And so they were like, hey, you know what? You guys got 30 days to pay up or get out of the city. And so many of them had to leave. They went further north to Detroit, Canada. And we believe that some of them probably were deposited there within that Africatown area, which caused that to prosper within the 1830s.
Yeah, it's brought out to the point where they couldn't get jobs without those papers, so they
Yeah.
were forced to, work on the canals themselves and build their own, Black companies, industries, and work that way, and, so you'd have this prospering town. All this, when I listen to it, you do such a wonderful job, and I feel like we're being told something that
Hmm.
nobody wanted us to know, or people didn't want us to know. It's you're uncovering this and you're bringing it out to light I to show us what happened so we can learn from it, and it's so wonderfully done. And I got chills listening to the first time, and I listened to it again, and just the imagery, I just can't praise it enough. How many will there be?
We have the second season written already. So I'm going to take a break. My wonderful son, who is our music director and audio engineer,
Yeah.
has knocked this out of the park.
Yes.
And when we finished that last episode, Out of Smoke and Ashes, he told me that
Yes.
I can't come back in the studio for another 6 months. So we he kicked me out. This is this is mother and son working together,
Mm.
and we are each experts in our own area. And I enjoy hearing you say how much you like this music aspect,
Oh,
because one of
yes.
the things that was my goal as an executive producer was to give these podcast layers.
Mm.
So when you listen again, you're going to have a completely different feel, because you'll be removed from the information and now you're listening to the music. And there were times when we would be in the studio and Jared would just begin at the piano
Hmm.
and play along with the narration that I had been recording. So I think that that's what is giving it that evoking, feeling,
Yes.
that as you say, that creates that theater of the mind. Is
Yeah.
that there were times, and I am proud to say that he wants to get this right.
Mm.
He wants to get this right. Um, there are things he will not let me do. Okay. There are things that as a matter of fact, I had to rewrite the open to the second podcast. And I was glad that I came up with something that he absolutely loved. But yes, because he said that this is not the way we will introduce our family. And he
Mm.
sent me back to the drawing board.
Wow.
So we have had those wonderful exchanges, and we are both quite proud of what we've come up with. And I think that the second season is going to be a lot easier in the production room, because we now understand, we've got our groove. So
Great.
I'm hoping it'll go a little faster. Season two is written. I will I will always tweak. I will continue to research and confirm up to the very last minutes. That seems to be the standard of what we're doing here. And so I will continue to do that. I have archives that I have not explored yet, that
Really.
um, that I know that are relevant to season two, that I've just come into possession with. So I'll go through those to confirm that I've got the stories right. But we should be ready in a few, and I'm not going to put a time frame on it, because it actually each episode is probably about 1 month of production.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, about 1 month of production.
Now you say you got some new information. How does somebody send it to you? Do you get books? Well, how does that happen?
Here's the thing: is that my mother and her cousin Betty Jane were the keepers of the family treasures. Um, Archives and letters that were passed. We have talk about free papers. We have manumission papers as well within our archive, and these things have been passed for these many generations. It has been astounding to me, the condition that they have been in. It is very evident that each generation does the best that they can. Um, and so my mother passed in 2008. So I have inherited some of her archives. I've got siblings who have, things as well, but I have inherited some of her archives. Um, there are still some of her things that I have not gone through.
Wow.
Then cousin Betty Jane just passed. She lived to be 99 years and 9 months. And
Wow.
we just lost her. And my cousin Sharon and I have been painstakingly going through her things. As a matter of fact, I will be in Ohio for an archive day with cousin Sharon coming up, and so that's why there are things. She's such a sweetheart. She told me, she said, "Cousin, I don't even go in that room." So I've got my bags packed with my archive gloves and sleeves and all of that stuff. So we'll do a day of that. And as I say, those are Higgins archives. And so that's why I know that they're going to be a part of this second season. Our family story only gets to 1842 at the end of this season with the founding of the Mother Church, First Wesleyan Church, founded by a group of women, the United Daughters of Zion. These women were among the people who decided to stay in Dayton, Ohio after the attacks on Africatown. And they bought a lot and they built a church. They took in extra laundry. Charity was a washerwoman. Um, and go to our Facebook page and you will see a picture of her cast irons, the irons that she used to pay that debt and gift the deed to the First Wesleyan Church. So these women worked together and they built two churches. They built one in 1842. And then when the community began to rally around the church, Black and white people attended First Wesleyan. They
Mm.
outgrew that church. And the United Daughters of Zion in 1854 built another church, took in extra laundry, 50 and 75 cents a day. They paid the debt and they gifted the deed to the First Wesleyan Church of Dayton. That church is celebrating 181 years of service, consecutive years from the founding of the United Daughters of Zion. So, Out of the Smoke and Ashes is the title of that episode because that was quite literally how the church was founded. And it is a direct quote from the biography that Julia Higgins wrote of her great grandmother, Charity Brodie. So we continue to tell the story that has been told. And within that biography, Julia writes about Africatown. She writes about the attack on Africatown. So that's what I mean about having these oral histories and the written histories, and then being able to take that information and do the research to confirm that those couple of lines that she wrote about this thriving Black community, to be able to confirm that that happened, that that dates, times, places, and as I said, the journalist in me wanted to know why it happened. So how long was this brewing in the community? And
Mm.
we were able to weave all of that together just from a couple of little lines of curiosity.
Amazing. Ma is it one of your hopes that other communities elsewhere in the country will do the same kind of research and uncover these kinds of wonderful stories?
One of our taglines is because there is value and there is validation in every family story. Um, every family has a story. Every I've heard people say that their family does not, and I challenge them on that
Mm, mm,
because there are things. One of the many organizations that my great grandmother founded was called the Unique Study Club. It was an organization that assisted Black veterans after WW1. It exists, as a matter of fact, loosely even to this day. It was established in 1900. When I returned from college and came back to Dayton, Ohio, got married, and I had the opportunity to join the Unique Study Club. Well, it was, I will have to say that there was no reluctance at all. Now, these
mm.
were a group of women who were of various ages, but I was clearly at that time among the youngest. And I wanted to be vice president because vice president got to write the program book for the 2-year term. I had a baby during that time, our oldest daughter, Jacqueline. And I brought Jacqueline to the meetings. And the way these women who had known my great grandmother, who had known my grandmother, were my mother's contemporaries, the way they interacted with my daughter is something that I will cherish my entire life. When I had my second daughter, we had a meeting at our home, at my home, and Mrs. Adelaide Hand was turning 100 years old that month. And she held, and I've got the picture in my living room right now, where she's holding my youngest daughter after this unique study club meeting. I often look at it and look at her hands and recognize the fact that she had held the hands of Mary Louisa, she had held the hands of Julia, she had held the hands of Charleste, she had held the hands of Emma, she had held the hands of Patricia, and now she was holding my baby. 6 generations.
Wow.
I know that it is unique, as is our study club. And I know that it is a blessing. But more than that, it is a responsibility
Hmm.
to tell families that they can do this too. Recognizing your importance in the moment, taking a time to write it down on a piece of paper, why you did this, how you felt. I often talk about how the story of COVID will be written. The story of COVID will talk about the controversy of its origin, the controversy of the numbers, and the controversy that surrounded the world's response to it.
Mm, mm,
But who's going to tell the stories
mm.
of the families that went from one hospital to another? The families who stood in the parking lot and sang to their loved ones who were drifting away inside. That's why you just write a word or two in a journal. Because just like what Uncle Charlie wrote to Aunt Eunice, I didn't know what to say.
Hmm.
Says everything to me. It says everything to me.
Do the online, 23andMe and Ancestry.com, do they help you at all?
Absolutely. One of the things that I do with those is they begin, yeah, because they give me my nuggets. And
Ah.
I can take those nuggets and confirm them in other ways and confirm them in other places.
Hmm.
But absolutely they do. The census reports and that the city directories. When I am in Ohio, I am but prior to COVID, I was a regular at the county archives doing research there. But yes, they do give me nuggets. Something else that I like, and when you were talking earlier about women being the keepers of family history,
Hmm.
I happen to really find resourceful Southern death certificates.
Hmm.
Unlike in the North, in the South, you can get almost 3 generations of information from a death certificate because it tells you the person's parents and, of course, the decedent, but it also tells you the person that was attending the decedent, the person who was the responsible party. And these are death certificates that are as early as the mid 1800s. And that's a wealth of information to go on. Um, because you've got grandparents and then you've got a next generation. And here's the thing about women is that who is it that is often the caretaker and making end of life decisions? It's generally us.
Yes, the
And
women as well, the
yeah,
mothers.
yeah, so that becomes another resource.
Mm. So you're able to get all this data and cross match it and make sure it, it connects and then
Mhm.
build the story that way. It's absolutely wonderful. Patricia, always around, I always mention in the podcast how I started my business and I ended up not paying attention, not treating myself well, and I gained a lot of weight. And the doctor said, if you don't lose the weight, not going to see your daughter graduate. I was pre-hypertensive. I gained 130 pounds. It was horrible. I was eating poorly and I was drinking too much soda and etc. So, I changed everything I did and I lost a lot of weight in about a year and a half. And people always ask me, how did I do it? And I just say discipline. I
Mm.
just got focused. The thought of not being there for my daughter not having a father, me not being there was what I needed to hear. And I changed everything I did. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life.
Um, I would say that it absolutely does. And it probably does so in quite a reluctant way because
Mm.
I don't necessarily want to be disciplined. And
Hmm.
I am always telling my wonderful husband of 40 years who is so disciplined and thinks he needs to be more disciplined that, lighten up, why don't you? But the truth of the matter is, I have been pretty disciplined in this process. Um,
Mm.
I am up like around 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, beginning
Wow.
to, especially when I'm writing. I am not going to be in that bed past 5:30 in the morning,
Really?
and I will write till about 2 o'clock. I'll break, and then I'm going to write again from maybe 7 to 11. So while I say that I am not disciplined, that probably does not really jive with what I am actually doing. And I know that, and you see, I'm looking over my shoulder to see if my son's going to come in the room. But I know that my son would not say that as well. That,
Interesting.
yeah, that and I perhaps it is about certain things. Perhaps it is about my craft. Perhaps it is about in this particular season of my life, it is about this project. I um, I have to get this right. And
Mm.
this is not for me. And this is not about me. And these women have provided us an extraordinary amount of inspiration. This has been a story that has existed, of course, for we're now 12 generations in the Miami Valley. And it's not been a secret. It has always been told, but there has not always been an appetite for Black and women's history. I don't know if there is an appetite for it now. However, I'm telling it in my way, because this is my contribution in this generation. Part of the Charity's Children Project is to provide a place of permanence for these extraordinary archives that we have. Letters from W.E.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes, Booker T. Washington. Um, we want to provide a place where there can be research in African and American history and Black and women's perspectives. Um, Many of these archives, it has been difficult for me to share. I even for people to look at because some of these things have not been seen outside of our family. My mother was very protective, as well was cousin Betty Jane, and even in sharing reproductions. It gives me great pause. Um, However, they also taught me that I can't hide this talent under a bushel,
Mm.
and we cannot deprive historians of documented fact of free blacks in the antebellum period, um, colonial African Americans who were living enslaved as well as free. Um, these folks took, I often talk about how Charity Brodie took her freedom seriously and felt that there was a responsibility on all levels, um, risking her own freedom to help the enslaved that came through the Miami Valley. We recently uncovered some additional research that will be augmenting season two. Charity, we believe, had a child named James Davis. James Davis was convicted of as an accomplice to murder in 1846. We believe it had something to do with that attack on Africatown. He served until 1860. And we found an article in the Columbus Dispatch, I believe, where Charity Brodie went to the governor and petitioned for the release of James Davis.
Hmm.
Said that he had served enough time and he should not be held any longer. This is in 1860 that this Black woman leaves Dayton, Ohio, and
Wow.
goes and tells the governor to let who we presume is her son, to let him go free. And he did. And he did. James Davis was released in 1864. So every time I think that I hear a story about Mother Charity that makes me proud, I find, another, the Fire Watcher's story, where she would mount her horse and patrol Dayton streets. As we do our historical research, we find that during the years that she was doing that she was either pregnant or had a baby on her back. And then to find even more evidence of her civic engagement with the Underground Railroad, even petitioning the governor for the release of her son, being at the Ain't I a Woman speech with Sojourner Truth in Toledo, and I'm sorry, in Akron. It continues to inspire. So you have to know, and I will say this, that part of this work that I'm doing is because, as my family would tell me these oral histories all these years, I would be like, wait a minute, Underground Railroad, suffrage, none of this, these time frames aren't lining up for me.
Mm.
Once again, that skeptic journalist, okay? Um, but when you live to be 98 years old, you do live those many lifetimes. And yeah, being able to confirm all of that, even finding C.C. Brodie listed as among the attendees at the Ain't I a Woman speech. So, painstaking research. And as you say, weaving all of this with the archives, with historical documentation, and with county records and census reports has brought us that legacy of Charity's children.
Might I assert that, you getting all this and feeling the weight of your family and the obligation that discipline synonyms like focus and willpower, you're using these to pull this all together and to orchestrate this is absolutely remarkable and commendable and remarkable. Shall I say remarkable as well? And inspiring as well. It's just it's all of that. Patricia, what motivates you?
Um, I will say that I'm motivated by first and foremost my mother.
Mm,
I am motivated to tell this story because she tried to tell it so desperately.
mm,
And even when other people would approach my mother about telling this story or sharing family archives, she would say no. And as I would attempt to encourage her, she said, "No, we have to tell this story.
mm,
We have to tell this story." So that's part of my motivation. The other part of my motivation is that, yes, I'm doing this part of the work, but on the front lines are my sister Carolyn, are my sister-in-law Cassandra, my nieces who every month meet with charities littlest children and do what we have always done. Told them this story. They learn to recite the story. They learn to recite the poems and say the prayers and sing the songs that have been in our families for our family for generations. They are learning to value this history. So regardless of what I would be doing with the podcast, what Jared and I are doing with music, and what Sherry and I do with research, and my wonderful producer Tammy, and my publicist LaChris, despite all of that team, if Carolyn and Cassandra weren't doing what they were doing with these children,
mm,
none of this would matter.
hmm.
None of this would matter. So that's part of what I value is,
Wow.
I guess it's that wind at my back that pushes me forward. And I guess as reluctantly as I want to have to admit this, it also causes me to, in some ways, be disciplined.
Mm. She says, yeah, rhetorically almost, yeah, embarrassingly. Do
Yeah.
you ever, when you're writing, do you ever hear some of your ancestors say, "I wouldn't say that," or "I do say that," or "That's good," or "That's bad"?
I do, and I receive it. One of the reasons I begin my writing day so early, um, there are times when I'm in the midst of a story where I'm up as early as 4 o'clock in the morning, going down as late as midnight or 1, where you
Hmm,
can't sleep. It is.
right.
It's like it's on the edge of my excuse me. It's like it's on the edge of my fingertips. It's on the tip of my tongue,
Mm,
and yes, I do feel inspired by that. One of the things that I noticed about my writing is the lyrical aspect of it.
hmm,
Um, the writing for the podcast became very lyrical
hmm,
and quite different from the more reporter journalistic edits that were early on. My grandmother, Charleste, was a poet. J.A. Rogers featured her in the Pittsburgh Courier in 1932, which was one of the things that he said about her, that he noted her lyrical prose and as well as her home, the old castle on the hill that was noted for its rare antiques and art objects. But yes, my grandmother was a published poet. And so it is not lost on me that that is what's coming out of my fingertips. Um, and the more research I do, I'm finding that grandmother Charlotte's mother, Julia, was quite a prolific writer as well. So yes, I do feel inspired, and there are some times when it has to be their words. It has
mm.
to be their words because um, I don't speak that way. So it has to be them.
You
Mhm.
know, when you're narrating the podcast, it does seem lyrical. The musical bedding, it ties so wonderfully with your voice and your use of inflection. Uh, you know, on the particular point, it's just wonderfully tied in with the words and the bedding. It's just so masterfully done. I keep repeating the same thing, but I just can't help but make that point.
Um, my mother was an opera singer as well
Mm,
as she was. Look up diva. You should see her picture there.
mm,
And she was an elocutionist as well. Hallie Q. Brown was a Ohio suffragist. Ms. Brown is featured in the Queens of the Heartland exhibit, and my great grandmother Julia Higgins has been added to that exhibit as well. But Miss Brown was a suffragist as she was an elocutionist, and she taught elocution to three generations of my family.
hmm,
Um, so that is what you hear. You hear the elocution stylings of Miss Holly Q. Brown. There, if there were another way that I knew to deliver it, I would.
mm,
But it is as innate as when I hit the microphone. That's just what comes out. Um, but that is the benefit of those three generations of training. My cousin Charleste More Sweet does the voice of Charity in Freedom Watchers, and you will hear that same styling, the same, perhaps even tones and pacing. She's my first cousin.
mm.
Our mothers were sisters. They were both taught by Miss Brown, and so yes, we continue to benefit from that three generations of friendship. Miss Brown was a contemporary of Julia Higgins, and she taught the grandchildren of Julia Higgins elocution as well as her daughter. So that's what you hear is Miss Brown. So Google Miss Holly Q Brown.
I will most certainly do that.
Yes.
Patricia Smith Griffin, how do you measure success?
Um, I am a fairly simple person. And I laugh out loud because I hear my family chiming in. Uh, but I don't want much. I want a little house at the end of a county road with my grandchildren playing in red dirt and listening to their grandmother tell them the story of 1802, 1803. John Davis brought his infant daughter Charity to the Miami Valley of Dayton, Ohio. So that's success for me. And I can't think of another thing. I'm having a blast doing the podcast. I am touched and elated that you have received it in the way in which it was intended. And but at the end of the day, just a good mother to my children, a good grandmother to the children that I am praying into existence, and a good wife to my husband. And
Mm.
um, that is the legacy.
Gave me chills. How wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. So, how can we get in touch with you? The big thing is the podcast, right? Charitiespchildren.org.
Go to CharitiesChildren.org. That is our website. We've got lots of goodies in there.
Yes,
We
yes.
are updating it all the time with new pictures and whatnot. We've got the Jordan Anderson letter is going to be posted on our website pretty soon. Jordan and Anderson is, it's been said that this letter is somewhat folklore. It is Mr. Anderson's response to his former enslaver asking him to come back. We treated you so good here. Why don't you come back? So
Wow.
Mr. Jordan Anderson responds to this letter. The letter has been touted online as being folklore, but our research says it is more than likely true.
Hmm.
The existence of Mr. Anderson is even doubted, but Mr. Jordan Anderson and three generations of his family attended First Wesleyan Methodist Church. The
Wow.
letter was likely written there at the church by the day school teachers with the help of the day school teachers. First Wesleyan provided the first school for Black children in Dayton, Ohio. So that letter is not folklore. Mr. Anderson is not folklore. Mr. Anderson was a real man who worked at the Soldiers' Home. As a matter of fact, he was one of the first men who broke ground on the what is now the Dayton's Veterans Administration. And his family attended First Wesleyan Church for over three generations. So that's the kind of stuff that, aside from what we're finding and researching about our family, that it's nice to be able to confirm those types of stories along the way as well.
Yeah, and some of the photos you have, like right behind you there on the wall, they're just wonderful. Just the generations and just the what you see at the expression on their face. It's just it's wonderful. I so enjoy your work and I praise it and I salute it and I will continue to advocate it as best I can. People
Yeah,
need to listen. Uh, Patricia Smith Griffin, an absolute
charityschildren.org.
pleasure.
Charityschildren.org is where you'll find us.
That's
The
it.
Legacy of Charity's Children is the podcast, and take a listen and then listen again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. You be well, and I wish you success, and I can't wait to hear a second season.
It's coming. As
Thank
soon
you
as
so much.
I'm back in the studio, right?
You be well. Thank you so much for your time.
Bye bye.
I know. Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations.